On today's show, why Cam Johnson could be the type of minor upgrade that the Houston Rockets look at to preserve continuity while still addressing a key weakness, and where does Houston rank in their Giannis pursuit? It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. On today's show, we're going to get into where the Houston Rockets rank in their pursuit of Giannis Antetokounmpo, given the fact that everybody apparently in the NBA has called about Giannis, all 30 teams. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. And then we're going to focus these first couple segments on Cam Johnson as a potential minor upgrade for the Houston Rockets, a target that they should be taking a heavy look at, and that there's been some rumored kind of, reporting, speculation about the Nets' desire to A, move Cam Johnson, and then B, their desire to get back into the lottery using any number of their late first round picks to be able to get back into the lottery area of this year's NBA draft. They have the number 8 overall selection in this year's draft, but then they also have the number 19 pick in this year's draft, and then they also have the 25th and 27th, 26th and 27th picks in this year's draft. So a lot of pathways for the Nets to be able to combine some of those assets and get back up into this year's lottery. So let's start with why Cam Johnson. Why would he make sense for the Houston Rockets? Well, first and foremost, Cam addresses a very specific need for the Rockets in their distinct lack of shooting on the roster. This is a Rockets team that did not shoot the ball very well this past season. They really did struggle, even though they had, a couple guys come on later in the season. This is a team that does not shoot the basketball well. Shooting is a distinct weakness on this team. Flat out, just scoring is a weakness on this Rockets team. And if they are dedicated to the idea that Rafael Stone discussed during his exit press conference about being a team-oriented team, about needing different guys to be able to step up and score the basketball and not relying on one person to do all the heavy lifting, if that is the goal and the direction of this organization, then they need players who are well-rounded offensive threats who can score from a variety of areas on the floor, who aren't one-dimensional offensive pieces. And that's where Cam Johnson could step in as a significant impact piece for this Rockets team, because Cam Johnson isn't just a, prototypical like 3-and-D wing. Cam Johnson is a scorer. He can put the ball on the floor. He can get to the mid-range. He's got a silky smooth jumper. He can pull up. He can drive and get all the way to the rim. He can score at all three levels really effectively. Just this past season, Cam Johnson averaged just under 19 points a game, 18.8 points per contest, and did it on only 13 shot attempts per game. That's kind of the crazy number. So he did about 19 points per game on only 13 shot attempts per game, managed to shoot 39% from downtown on 7.2 three-point attempts per game, had an effective field goal percentage of 58.2%. Very, very solid across the board as just a flat out scoring option. And he's not a slouch defensively either. He's not your, he's not ever going to be a guy that you want as your ace defender. He's not going to be the guy that you want to park on the opposing team's best player, but he would absolutely fit into this Rockets team identity, a defense first team identity. I don't have any reservations about his ability to, adapt to this Ime Udoka led system, with the priority being on defense. He played fantastic when he was in Phoenix on the defensive end of the floor, before they packaged him and Mikal Bridges off to the Brooklyn Nets for Kevin Durant. And when you look at this Rockets team, you think about where they have areas that they could ultimately improve the roster. If the goal is to bank on continuity, right? If continuity is the direction this team ultimately wants to go, I think a lot of people, and myself included, take continuity to mean, yes, no major changes, what have you. But I think taking it one step further is the idea that they're not ready to give up on any of the young core. And a lot of Rockets fans are in that boat, right? And I fully understand, even though I've been the one firing up random trades and doing all this stuff with Jalen or Sengun or whoever, like, I fully understand the hope and the optimism that give it one more year, right? Give them another chance, run it back. Don't touch any of the young guys. Let them have one more year to see if it's legit. Where a lot of my concerns from and a lot of my desire to make a move right now stems from the opportunistic approach of looking at salaries and when certain guys' contract extensions kick in, and how to capitalize on things right now as opposed to a year from now if things get even worse, right? If Jalen has another bad playoff series, then is anybody even going to want him on his current deal? Like, all these different factors to consider. But right now on today's show, I'm going to operate under the assumption, right? Team doesn't make any moves. They don't want to make any moves, and they want to keep all the young pieces in place. If that's the case, running this exact team back next season, you'd probably still experience a similar level of success, but you'd also still have the glaring weaknesses that were present on this team this past year, right? You'd still have a lot of offensive question marks. You'd still have a team that was largely needed to be propped up by offensive rebounding and second and third chance opportunities, instead of a team that could just, be a good offensive team, because they just don't necessarily have all the weapons to be a good offensive team. And so from that perspective, trying to look at this roster, trying to look at the spots that could be upgraded without removing one of the young core pieces, and the two very easy to identify areas of upgrade would be the point guard position with Fred VanVleet, or the small forward position with Dillon Brooks. And that's why we're focused on a Cam Johnson hypothetical here and what it would look like. And it would involve trading one Dillon Brooks. We're going to talk about what the deal would ultimately look like here in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by DoorDash. NBA fans, you know what time it is. The NBA Finals are here, and that means big performances and even bigger rewards. DoorDash is bringing the heat with a slam dunk deal for Dash Pass members during the 2025 NBA playoffs. It's called They Swoosh, You Score. Anytime a player drops 50 or more points in a playoff game, Dash Pass members score a free 3-piece crispy tenders combo from Wingstop the very next day. Just place an order of $20 or more. Use the code WINGSTOP50 at checkout, and that combo is yours. Crispy, delicious, and totally free. Offer valid noon until midnight the day after the game. Terms apply. What's your go-to move after an epic playoff performance? Are you ordering wings and reliving the highlights? Imagine being rewarded with free food just because someone went off for 50. So here's the play. Sign up for Dash Pass to unlock this and more exclusive deals all season long. When any player scores 50 plus in a playoff game, Dash Pass members can grab a free 3-piece crispy tenders combo from Wingstop the very next day with a $20 or more order and code WINGSTOP50. That's Dash Pass, your door to more savings, more flavor, and more ways to win. Terms apply. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, now here's the downside to this potential deal is, of the Houston Rockets that played last season, Dillon Brooks was literally the team's best shooter, unfortunately. So it's kind of painful to have to look at this situation and think, okay, well, what's the only way to upgrade the roster and to add more shooting? Well, you got to subtract the guy who was already the team's best shooter. But I think that's a good place to actually start this discussion, and I'll get to what a trade would ultimately look like. But in comparing the differences between Dillon Brooks and Cam Johnson, I think that Dillon Brooks has the reputation as a significantly better defender than Cam Johnson. But I think when you go with the eye test, right, and how Dillon has looked, really since the end of last season and even throughout significant stretches of this year, I'm not going to go so far as to say like that Dillon Brooks has lost a step defensively, but Dillon is not quite the ace defensive presence that he's made out to be, or that his reputation is on the basketball floor. And that's readily apparent when you watch him, and when you watch like the juxtaposition of like how Amin Thompson guards opposing star players and how effective he is against them versus when Dillon Brooks gets switched onto a star player and you're like, oh, okay, well, Dillon may be about to get cooked. And that's a little bit problematic, right? If you're supposed to be an ace defensive wing, like there shouldn't be a moment where like you're worried about Dillon Brooks in a specific matchup. But unfortunately, that happens a lot. He has a tendency to be a little over aggressive at times, fouling at inopportune moments. The 3-point shooting fouls that happened, like, in the playoffs were kind of brutal to talk about. And ultimately, he doesn't quite have the lateral quickness and the speed to stick with some of the smaller players these days. And so he does get burnt a lot on drives by smaller, faster players. His strength is guarding the bigger, stronger guys and using his strength, using his physicality to his advantage. But I would go so far as to argue that by level of importance, Dillon Brooks' offensive contributions have been more important to the success of this Rockets team than his defensive contributions. And I'd go so far as to say that that's been the case for a while now, right? Even this past season, right? Dillon Brooks, we saw, first off, his numbers from this past season were super impressive, right? He shot just a hair under 40% from three, 39.7% from downtown on 6.3 attempts per game, averaged 14 points per contest on just under 12 shot attempts per game. He really developed and got really comfortable with that turnaround midi as kind of a counter when he would drive the ball in, get into the teeth of the defense and be able to hit that turnaround or post up on smaller players and hit that turnaround, as kind of a mismatch opportunity within the Rockets offense. But, Dillon is not a super effective offensive player. Like just by comparison, comparing Dillon Brooks to Cam Johnson, Dillon Brooks had an effective field goal percentage of 53.3% versus Cam Johnson's effective field goal percentage of 58.2%. That's damn near a 5% jump across those two guys. And again, Cam Johnson averaged almost 19 points per game on only one shot attempt more per contest than Dillon Brooks. And this isn't as simple as just a copy paste and you put Cam Johnson on the Rockets and he's going to be able to give you 19 a game on fantastic efficiency. He wouldn't, but if you were to give Cam Johnson Dillon Brooks' shot diet on the Houston Rockets, I think he could do a lot with that, right? I think you'd see similar levels of production to what he's giving or what he gave the Brooklyn Nets this past season. And I think it would give the Rockets another offensive weapon that is a little bit more versatile than the limited bag that Dillon Brooks has. Because Dillon Brooks is not a guy that you want to, give the ball to and say, go to work, even though that's what the Rockets offense kind of dictated at times because they just didn't have anything else because they had kind of a poor offensive system, poor offensive structure, or at times other guys just couldn't get anything going. So Dillon Brooks would just go Dillon Brooks takeover. And sometimes it worked and it looked really awesome. And other times it hurt, right? Because that's not really your best offensive approach to give Dillon Brooks the ball and let him go to town. Cam Johnson's a different animal offensively. I think he's a much more fluid offensive player. Again, a true 3-level scorer, much more efficient offensive option. And I really don't think there's that much of a gap in how impactful they both are defensively at this stage in their respective careers. Cam Johnson is about a month younger than Dillon Brooks, and they're on very similar contract deals, 2 more years, roughly around, just over $20 million each season. And so in just kind of comparing and contrasting their differences, I do want to highlight here, right? And we've talked about this a lot in regards to like guys like Fred VanVleet or even Steven Adams. The intangibles part of this and the culture part of it, and Dillon Brooks, the Rockets have often referred to him as the head of the snake defensively. I think that's more of a tone and mentality thing than it is the actual on-court production as far as how impactful Dillon is as a defender. And that's one of the things that's really hard to weigh here is Dillon Brooks a guy that, if you were to just cleanly swap Dillon Brooks for Cam Johnson, how much better would this Rockets team get? I don't think they get worse. And I firmly believe that. I think they do get better. But how much better do they get? And is that marginal increase, is that marginal improvement worth the potential asset cost to get Cam Johnson? We're going to get into the deal here in a second. And then B, is it worth the disruption of removing Dillon Brooks, a guy who's been one of those vocal locker room leaders, who's helped set the tone and the identity for this team under Ime Udoka in his 2 years being here? Is it worth that? Right? So there are a lot of factors to consider here. But when you're looking at a Rockets team that is in definite need of some kind of improvements, and that's where I maintain that it would be a catastrophic mistake to just run this identical team back one more season, because all the vets will be a year older, right? Fred, Dylan, Adams, they'll all be a year older. And yes, all the young guys will have a year more of experience, but it's not a guarantee that suddenly all these young guys start playing out of their minds, or guys have, a year 3 leap or a year 4 leap or a year 5 leap or what have you. And that's the major concern, is that you have a chance to, you might plateau, you might even regress a little bit if the Rockets potentially overachieved with their 52 wins this past season. And so adding a scoring option like a Cam Johnson, who's a little bit more of a versatile scorer offensively, might be the type of minor upgrade that helps the Rockets take 1 or 2 steps forward without it having to be this massive big swing for a star player like a Giannis or a Kevin Durant or a Devin Booker or something like that. So that being said, what would the deal look like? There was speculation from Nets Daily the other day on social media that the Nets are looking at getting back into the lottery using some combination of their other first round picks that they have. Again, 19, 26, and 27. They've also made it, apparent that guys like Nick Claxton and Cam Johnson are available in trade talks. So enter the trade proposition here if you're the Houston Rockets. Pick number 10 and Dillon Brooks for Cam Johnson and pick number 19. So effectively, you are swapping Cam and Dillon, and for whatever, level of improvement you deem that worthy. And then you are, the asset cost to be able to do that is effectively moving down from pick 10 all the way back down to pick number 19. So you slide down 9 slots. The Nets get a first round lottery selection. And yeah, so that would be more or less kind of the go-to option. Now the downside is here, and I already know other people are going to say, well, what could the Rockets go get Cam Johnson without giving up Dillon Brooks? And it's basically impossible. Like, that's the downside to how the Rockets are currently structured, how their contracts ultimately look. They don't have a ton of miscellaneous tradable salary. They've got the Jock Landale deal sitting at about $8 million. They've got Aaron Holiday sitting at about $5 million team option that they could pick up. Other guys are free agents, right? Jeff Green's a free agent. Jayshawn Tate's a free agent. Adams is a free agent. They just don't have enough aggregatable salary to be able to get up to Cam Johnson's a little over $20 million salary, and be able to keep Dillon Brooks, right? And even if you did do that, then what does the minutes even look like at that point? Because then you'd have Dillon and Cam and Jabari and Tari, and you'd still have the other Cam Whitmore, waiting in the wings, trying to break into the rotation a little bit. So that's the proposal, right? And I've seen that specific trade circulating around social media and other Rockets fans discussing it. And it's been a bit of a split divide on whether or not that trade makes sense for the Rockets. Is Cam Johnson, is an upgrade to Cam Johnson worth sliding back 9 slots in the lottery? I think I would do it. As sad as I would be to see Dillon Brooks go, because he's very much ingratiated himself as a fan favorite member of the Houston Rockets, putting the R logo, in his braids during the playoffs, all that stuff. I just think that there's certain limitations that he has offensively. I think that it's really hard to look at his shooting numbers from this past season and not think of them as an outlier, because career-wise, Dillon Brooks has been a 35.5% three-point shooter. This last season was easily his best shooting season as a pro from the three-point line. Meanwhile, Cam Johnson is a career 39% three-point shooter. So the faith in Cam Johnson and his ability to stay at that 40% mark from three is a lot higher in my eyes than it is for Dillon Brooks to replicate the offensive success that he had this past year. If Dillon Brooks comes back down to earth next season and he's only shooting 35, 36, 37% from three, then suddenly the Rockets offense just took a massive hit because their best three-point shooter just got a lot worse. And we've seen that happen before. We've seen players have an outlier shooting season, and unfortunately, you got to take the entire body of work and think that Dillon Brooks is probably closer to who he's been his entire career as opposed to the guy that he was just last season. Even his first season as a Rocket, he shot 36% from three, which was a little bit below league average. Those are the numbers that I'm more inclined to believe than his spectacular shooting performance from this past campaign. So if that's the case, if that's the argument that I've laid at your feet, Dillon Brooks and the number 10 pick for Cam Johnson and the number 19 pick, would you do that trade? Do you think that trade improves the Rockets? Do you think that's too much to give up asset cost for a guy like Cam Johnson? Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Coming up, where do the Houston Rockets rank in their Giannis pursuit with all 30 teams inquiring about the Greek Freak? We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment costs, it's really easy to lose track. It happens to me more often than it used to happen to me more often than I'd like to admit. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building your wealth. When I started using Monarch Money, I was a little ashamed to realize just how much I was spending on like dining out, restaurants, fast food, all that stuff. Now I budget smarter and I save more. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right. So there was some reporting from Mark Stein the other day that basically said that all 30 teams have inquired about Giannis Antetokounmpo. And it makes sense, right? Top three player in his prime. You know, Milwaukee's in an unstable situation. It makes sense that there's a gigantic market for this star player. This is almost like what should have happened with a potential Luka Doncic trade if Nico Harrison wasn't a basketball terrorist. But lo and behold, that's what the Dallas Mavericks get, and then the Lakers get gift-wrapped Luka Doncic. I digress. So it feels like there's going to be a pretty substantial bidding war for Giannis this summer. And when you look at the lay of the land in the NBA and the other potential star players or other marquee talents that are going to be available this summer, there's not going to be a single move made until the decision is cemented and guaranteed that Giannis is either A, not being dealt, or B, is dealt to somewhere other than just like that. The Giannis domino is the first domino that has to fall, right? There will not be a KD trade before a Giannis trade. There will not be a Booker trade. There will not be a Jalen Brown trade. There will not be any other trade made until all 29 other teams other than the Bucks, right, are sure that they are out of the Giannis sweepstakes. So with that being said, where do the Rockets potentially rank in their pursuit of Giannis Antetokounmpo? And we've talked about this a little bit with some of the other teams that were rumored to have heavy interest in Giannis, or some of the teams that were betting favorites to be able to land Giannis in this blockbuster deal potentially this summer. And the two teams that still jump out at the forefront of being firmly in the mix for Giannis are the Houston Rockets and the San Antonio Spurs, both from a age and timeline perspective, from a competitive perspective, from what the assets would look like going back to Milwaukee, all these different factors. Now, There are, other teams with some reported interest, right? The Knicks, who seem to throw their hat into the ring for every star player. And the Knicks, I'm just going to go ahead and lay that to rest. The Knicks cannot put up a more competitive offer than either San Antonio or Houston. It's not going to happen. Now, if Giannis says, I only want to play in New York, that changes the calculus of things a little bit. Similar to if the Brooklyn Nets decide to jump into the deal, right? The Nets have a lot of future draft capital. They have their own future draft capital. They have some draft capital from some other teams. So the Nets could be maybe some players in this trade, but the Nets also don't have the abundance of young talent to be able to send back to Milwaukee for a Giannis, right? They don't have really a true blue chip cornerstone prospect or player to send back as the cornerstone of a Giannis deal. The other team that is, I think, sneakily the team that has potentially the best offer for Giannis is the OKC Thunder, right? And this is where I think there's a little bit of, a house of cards kind of at play here in this potential Giannis pursuit, is that big if, and side note, I picked the Pacers to win the finals, so we'll see what happens. I said Pacers in 7. I also called Pacers winning game 1, so when that happened, I was like, yeah. But if the Thunder lose in the finals to the Indiana Pacers, there is not a doubt in my mind that Sam Presti is immediately going to be on the phone with Milwaukee, figuring out what a deal looks like to get Giannis paired up with SGA in Oklahoma City. Because SGA is a current MVP and playing out of his mind. Giannis is a 2-time MVP and a top 3 player in the NBA right now. And if you were able to pair 2 of the 3 best players in the NBA right now in the middle of their primes, this OKC team was already a juggernaut buzzsaw, just carving teams up left and right this season. And they've been the overwhelming favorite in every series that they've played in. And maybe losing to the Pacers would be an overreaction by Sam Presti and the OKC front office to then run out there and say, yep, we're going to go get Giannis. We need a little bit more, but I also wouldn't put it past him to do that, especially if all it took was one of J-Dub or Chet Holmgren and then the mountain treasure trove of draft assets that OKC is sitting on because Sam Presti hoards first-round picks like a dragon hoarding gold. It seems like a bit of a no-brainer for OKC to be able to swoop in, claim Giannis, and then have a big 3 of SGA, Giannis, and one of J-Dub or Chet Holmgren left over. Chet makes a ton of sense from a schematic perspective. He's the perfect complement to Giannis on both sides of the floor. But J-Dub is also their other ball handler, right? And he's the other perimeter threat, and maybe you want to maintain that. I digress. My point here still stands that I think that of all 29 teams in the association, the only team that can put up a better, more concrete offer than the Houston Rockets can, if the Rockets really wanted to go chips to the center of the table, right? If getting Giannis was their absolute be-all, end-all goal, and they didn't care what the cost was. Now, I'm not saying put in, Sengun and Amin Thompson or something crazy like that. I'm just saying a realistic trade package from the Rockets. I think the only team that can beat out the Rockets' realistic trade package is the OKC Thunder. Because if you can put up one of J-Dub, who is an all-star, or Chet Holmgren, who isn't an all-star yet, but very much has all-star caliber potential and is a defensive nightmare. If you put up one of those 2 guys, plus salary filler, plus maybe 1 or 2 other young prospects. They have Nikola Topic, who hasn't even Topic. I really don't remember how to say his last name, who hasn't even suited up for a single game yet as a member of the Thunder. They've still got all the future draft capital, significantly more future draft capital than the Rockets have access to. If the Thunder wanted to get into a bidding war, I think they could outbid any other team in the association for Giannis. And then past that, I don't think anybody else has a better offer than Houston, even San Antonio to that degree. Even when we've compared in the past what San Antonio's best offer would be versus Houston's best offer, it still certainly feels like Houston's best offer is the better offer on the table as far as getting a clear-cut cornerstone prospect back and a guy like Alperen Sengun, because, again, we talked about it, it's not going to be Amin Thompson. Maybe there's a 0.001% chance that they would trade him instead of Sengun for Giannis, but I highly doubt it. But if the deal from the Rockets was Sengun and then one of Jabari or Tari and then Cam Whitmore plus draft picks for Giannis versus the Spurs offer of Steph Castle, the number 2 overall pick, Keldon Johnson, Jeremy Sohan, and draft picks, like, I think the Rockets deal beats out that deal by a pretty wide margin. Maybe not a wide margin. I think maybe eye of the beholder, but I do think the Rockets deal is more competitive than that Spurs deal on the surface. But OKC's deal blows either one out of the water, simply from a picks package perspective, from the upside talent perspective of the young prospect going back. I think that J-Dub would be the best player going back to Milwaukee, potentially even better, at least right now, maybe even better than Alperen and Sengun from Milwaukee's perspective of what they want to get out of a player, or a player that they could, maybe build some stuff around, what have you. That's interchangeable. You can argue J-Dub versus Sengun. I think I'd put Chet one tier below those guys. I think I'd put Steph Castle another tier below those guys. The number 2 overall pick, another tier below those guys, the number 10 pick that the Rockets have that they're working with. There's a lot to look at there, but that to me is the most interesting dynamic is if the Thunder fail in the finals, now Thunder win the title, then they don't care. They'll ride off into the sunset and they're going to stick with their big 3. And they've already proven they're like, hey, okay, we won a title with these guys. We're still the youngest team in the NBA. We're only going to get better. That's a team that gets to bank on continuity. That's a team that doesn't have to break anything up. In fact, I'd go so far as to wager that the Thunder could absolutely lose in the finals and you still bank on continuity. And that's a better bet than the Rockets banking on continuity with their current constructed roster. All that being said, I think it very much goes OKC 1, Houston 2, San Antonio 3, and then probably a pretty substantial gulf between those top 3 teams in pursuit of Giannis. Because I don't think any other teams out there have, again, the collection of young talent, future draft capital, and desirability as far as competitiveness or location or coaching or any of those other kind of ancillary factors in a potential Giannis pursuit. So we'll see how it plays out. But that report was very interesting that all 30 teams have inquired about Giannis. Every single one. Could you imagine if you're Milwaukee getting a call about Giannis from like the Charlotte Hornets and you just... We'd like to give you LaMelo Ball. Click. That's not happening. All right. On that note, I'm very curious your thoughts. Where do you think the Houston Rockets rank in their potential Giannis pursuit? Where do you think their trade package, ranks? Is it the second best behind OKC? Is it still better than OKC's offer? Is it not as good as San Antonio's offer? I want your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Also, give me your thoughts on the potential acquisition of Cam Johnson. Would love to hear your thoughts about potentially upgrading from Dillon Brooks to Cam, all that good stuff. But as always, thanks so much for checking out the show. Remember, the best way to help us grow the show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.